Hello and welcome to yet another very entertaining video. I've drawn this little cartoon of skin showing the dermis, the epidermis, the hypodermis, and some of the structures that we might find in a histology slide. We're going to detail some of these. For today's purpose, we just want to focus on the epidermis. That's going to be this top region right here. And what we'd like to do is just go through the different layers and describe just a little bit how the skin develops its hard protective waterproof coating. So let's zoom in and look at the different layers and the different cell types that we might find there. We want to start from the bottom and work our way up. And the bottom foundation that we're going to build on is a fairly dense layer of connective tissue. This is important because it serves as a barrier between the epidermis and the dermis. These layers are actually derived from different germ layers during embryonic development. And as we talk about melanoma a little bit later on, hopefully we can highlight why this barrier is so important. But for now, one of the things that I want you to recognize, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about the dermis in another video, the curves and bumps are called papillae. And primarily they serve the key purpose of increasing surface area for capillary exchange. So let's draw a little capillary bed coming up in here. I highlight this now because the epidermis, the layer that we're going to talk to, is avascular. There is no blood supply to the epidermis. But by providing these papillae, these curves that protrude into the epidermis to increase surface area, we can facilitate capillary exchange on these lower areas of the epidermal tissue. All right, let's start with our first layer, the basal layer, also known as the stratum basale. This basal layer is a single cell layer thick, and this is where we find our keratinocyte stem cells. These are cuboidal in nature, and they really just have one job. This is where we find cell division. So we could show that maybe this cell here is dividing. And as stem cells, they will divide, but it'll be an asynchronous division. They'll give rise to a keratinocyte that will work its way up through the layers, but also another stem cell that stays on this basement membrane and continues to divide. That's a key attribute of the skin. It's always dividing. It's always replenishing itself. We'll also find on this layer our pigment cells, the melanocytes. The relationship between melanocytes and keratinocytes is very important. They regulate each other's growth, and they help protect each other. And we'll detail how that works here in just a minute. All right, the next layer is going to be the spinous layer, stratum spinosum. This will be 8 to 10 cell layers thick. We'll draw a few layers. This is the result of the cell division that's happening in the basal layer. And of course, the name spinous comes from their overall shape. This spinous shape is caused by two things. Number one, we have dehydration that has started to occur as water is pulled out of these cells. And this accentuates where the cells are holding hands. And they hold hands through cell-cell connections called desmosomes. Now, I'll also want to throw in a type of dendritic cell called the Langerhans cell. This is where we find most of the Langerhans cells. And this is an antigen-presenting cell. We've already talked a little bit about immunity. Okay, our next layer is the granular layer. This is typically between 2 to 5 cell layers thick. We want to draw some granules. Some things to note about this layer. We already mentioned the granules. These are called keratohyalin granules. These play a couple of key roles. They promote dehydration. We talked about how the spinous layer, water is being sucked out, right? We see that shape because that water is actually attracted by osmosis to these keratohyalin granules. We also see the release of lamellar bodies. These are waterproofing lipids. Organelle degeneration happens here. And we start to take the keratin that was produced in the stratum spinosum and we start to cross-link it together. That's another role for the keratohyalin granules. And then our last layer, the stratum corneum, or the cornified layer. This could be anywhere from 25 to 30 layers thick. Of course, we're talking about normal skin. If it was thick skin, something we see on the palms of our hands or feet, there might be the stratum lucidum in between the corneum and the granular layer. But cells have now really flattened out. They're squamous. And these are essentially just dead cells. There's no more organelles in them. They have no nuclei. These are just bags of keratin, where keratin, primarily made by cells in the spinous layer, is the intermediate filament that gives skin its tensile strength, that holds all of this stuff together through the cross-linking that the keratohyalin granules provided. And of course, this is going to slough off every day. We have bits and pieces of this coming off as new skin underneath it replaces it. So there's our layers of skin. I do want to go back to those melanocytes. These melanocytes are an interesting cell, and their job is to provide melanin, pigment, for the cells in this layer. So as the sun beats down, we're bombarded by UV rays. Now we'll talk about the importance of ultraviolet in the generation of vitamin D in another video. UV is important for that. Too much UV is a bad thing, and we don't need very much at all to make vitamin D. The problem is ultraviolet light penetrates and breaks DNA. And of course, anytime I've got DNA damage, that's going to lead to cancer eventually. So along come the melanocytes. Their job is to shield the keratinocytes from this UV damage. They have nearite outgrowths, and they connect anywhere between 36 and 40 keratinocytes. And as the keratinocytes sense UV light, they signal to the melanocyte, hey, I need protection. The job of the melanocyte then is to make melanin, these balls of pigment packaged in what are called melanosomes, and these melanosomes are transferred through these nearite outgrowths to create a shield around these cells to protect the nucleus from UV damage. The melanosomes, the pigment, is naturally designed to absorb UV light. And this is why, as you go outside in the sun, a little bit of sunlight can cause your skin to darken. You'll get a tan. But too much will cause it to burn. That tells you you've gone too far. You've got an inflammatory response. You've got cell death and damage. But a little bit of sun, day by day over time, can signal these melanocytes to send more and more pigment to the keratinocytes to protect them from the damaging UV rays that come from the sun. And the result will be darker skin. Of course, if cancer does happen, the most common type of cancer is going to be basal cell carcinoma. We'll highlight that with a little bit of asterisk. This is the most common type of skin cancer, but it's really not any cancer is bad, I get that. But comparatively, basal cell carcinoma is not that big of a deal as long as it's caught early and taken care of, because these epithelial cells, the keratinocytes, really don't have the ability to migrate. And that thick basement membrane that they're sitting on does a really good job of isolating them from the rest of the body. The same can't be said for the melanocytes. If a melanocyte turns cancerous, it retracts its neurite outgrowths, and it loses that communication with the keratinocytes, and it starts to grow uncontrollably. Now, sometimes it will stop right there. This is called a benign nevus or a mole, and we're okay. It's just going to stop. But sometimes these cells, because of their embryonic origins, have the ability to break through the basement membrane and migrate. And now that these cells have gotten into the body, they can spread rapidly through the blood system or the lymphatics and invade other tissues. They tend to go to the brain, to the lung, to the liver, and if they are able to take up residence there, this will lead to an early demise. Melanoma is one of the deadliest cancers, ounce for ounce, that we know of. And so the moral of the story, tanning beds are not safe. There's no such thing as safe UV, and please always wear sunblock.